The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as people packed into every available seat, their murmurs blending into a low hum of restless energy. Reporters sat poised with notepads and cameras, waiting for the entrance of the man who had dominated headlines for weeks. Then, the heavy wooden doors swung open, and Logan Caldwell strode in, his presence demanding attention. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal gray suit that reeked of luxury. His slicked-back hair glistened under the fluorescent lights, and as he stepped inside, he didn't display the nervousness or remorse expected of a man facing serious charges. Instead, he smirked, as if he were gracing the room with his presence rather than standing trial for defrauding hundreds of families. The spectators watched in hushed disbelief. How could a man who had stolen millions from hardworking people, forcing many into financial ruin, walk in with such an air of invincibility? To Logan, this courtroom was nothing more than an inconvenience, a temporary roadblock that he had no doubt his team of high-powered attorneys would dismantle. He was a man who lived above consequences, a billionaire accustomed to bending the world to his will. He had thrown extravagant yacht parties, owned penthouses in New York and Los Angeles, and mingled with celebrities and politicians. His financial empire, Caldwell Capital, had once been touted as a model of innovation and success. Investors had lined up to pour their life savings into his schemes, believing in his empty promises of high returns. Yet behind the gleaming corporate facade was a foundation built on fraud, deception, and outright theft. He had sold dreams that never materialized, leaving ordinary families in financial ruin while he indulged in private jets and five-star vacations. But Logan had never concerned himself with the aftermath of his schemes. He had always believed that money, connections, and a little legal maneuvering would keep him untouchable. When the bailiff's voice rang through the courtroom, announcing the arrival of Judge Eleanor Tate, everyone immediately rose to their feet. Everyone, that is, except Logan. He remained seated, flipping through a legal pad with an air of boredom, as if the proceedings were beneath him. His lawyer leaned in and whispered something urgently, likely advising him to stand, but Logan merely waved a dismissive hand, refusing to acknowledge the judge's presence. A ripple of whispers spread through the courtroom. The audacity, the arrogance. Who did this man think he was? Judge Tate, a woman known for her no-nonsense approach and unshakable composure, took her seat at the bench. She paused, her sharp gaze locking onto Logan with piercing intensity. She didn't need to say a word. The weight of her silence was enough to make the tension in the room unbearable. Logan, however, barely glanced up. He had played this game before, manipulated the system, bought his way out of trouble. He believed this case would be no different. "You may be seated," Judge Tate finally said, her voice steady and commanding. The spectators lowered themselves back into their seats, but the air had shifted. The arrogance that Logan displayed was not lost on anyone in the room, least of all Judge Tate. She had dealt with powerful men before, men who thought their wealth could shield them from accountability. But what Logan Caldwell failed to realize was that in her courtroom, power and privilege meant nothing in the face of the law. As the proceedings began, Logan leaned back in his chair, exuding a level of confidence that bordered on defiance. His fingers tapped idly against the polished wood of the defense table, his expression unreadable but undeniably smug. He whispered something to his lead attorney, who nodded slightly, a silent understanding passing between them. To Logan, this was all performative, a show for the public, a spectacle he would soon put behind him. He had seen others in his world walk away from worse, and he fully intended to do the same. But the crowd wasn't so sure. Many in attendance had been personally affected by his fraudulent dealings. They had seen their bank accounts drained, their retirement funds vanish, their dreams for their children's futures collapse, and yet, the man responsible for their suffering sat before them. Not with guilt or remorse, but with arrogance, as if he were the victim in this story. The courtroom was filled with the weight of their silent fury, their collective yearning for justice. Judge Tate glanced down at the case files before her, taking her time before looking up again, her gaze once more landing on Logan Caldwell. Her expression remained unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, an unwavering resolve that suggested this trial would be different. This time, Logan Caldwell wouldn't be the one in control. This time, justice would not be bought. Logan Caldwell had always been a master of illusion. To the world, he was a visionary investor, a self-made billionaire whose financial genius had turned Caldwell Capital into a powerhouse. He graced the covers of business magazines, delivered keynote speeches about success, and hosted lavish galas where he played the part of a benevolent entrepreneur. But behind the glamour and carefully curated image was something far more sinister. His wealth wasn't built on innovation or hard work, it was built on fraud, on the calculated destruction of lives. The courtroom was filled with people who had once believed in him. They weren't corporate giants or Wall Street elites, they were working-class families, retirees, small business owners, all of whom had trusted Logan with their money, their dreams, their futures. They had believed his promises of high returns, had been seduced by his charm and confident assurances that their investments were safe. But now, as they sat in the gallery watching him smirk from the defense table, the betrayal was all too real. One of those victims was Margaret Ellis, a 63-year-old widow who had planned to use her investments with Caldwell Capital to secure her retirement. After losing her husband to cancer, Margaret had been cautious with her savings, wanting to ensure she could support herself in her later years. Logan's company had seemed like the perfect opportunity. Stable, promising, endorsed by industry leaders. She had invested nearly everything she had. Now, she had nothing. The home she and her husband had built together had been sold to cover debts she never should have had. She lived in a tiny apartment, counting every dollar to make sure she could afford groceries. And there he was, the man responsible, sitting in that chair with a smug grin, as if none of it mattered. Beside Margaret sat James Holloway, a former firefighter who had spent decades running into burning buildings to save strangers. He had been counting down the days until retirement, looking forward to finally enjoying life without danger lurking around every corner. His pension was supposed to be enough, but when Logan's firm had pitched an exclusive investment opportunity, promising life-changing returns, he had decided to take a chance. "Just let your money work for you," they had said. "We'll take care of the rest." Only they hadn't. Now at 58, instead of planning vacations or spending time with his grandchildren, James was working a night shift as a security guard, just to keep up with rent. The bitterness in his expression was unmistakable as he watched Logan from across the room, his jaw clenched tight, his hands balled into fists. Their stories weren't unique. Dozens of victims filled the courtroom, each with a similar tale of deception and devastation. College funds had been wiped out, businesses had collapsed, elderly couples had lost everything they had worked their entire lives for. The ripple effects of Logan Caldwell's greed had spread far and wide, destroying lives without a second thought. And yet, he sat there, exuding an air of untouchability. As the prosecution began laying out its case, a large screen was rolled to the front of the courtroom. The lead prosecutor, David Reynolds, a sharp, relentless attorney with years of experience taking down financial criminals, approached the screen. He took a deep breath, then pressed play on a video that immediately seized the courtroom's attention. A recording of an internal meeting at Caldwell Capital flickered to life. The voices were unmistakable. Logan's voice, smooth and dripping with confidence, echoed through the speakers. "We just need them to sign. Make the numbers look good. These people don't know what they're doing. They see big numbers, they get excited, and that's when we close the deal. Just make sure we don't leave a paper trail." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The victims exchanged stunned looks, their faces a mixture of shock and fury. Margaret covered her mouth with her hands, her body trembling. James shook his head, muttering under his breath. Judge Eleanor Tate remained expressionless, but the fire in her eyes had intensified. David Reynolds turned to face the courtroom, his voice clear and unwavering. These are the words of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a bad business decision. It was fraud, a deliberate, calculated effort to steal from innocent people. He let the weight of his words settle over the room before continuing. "And this," he gestured to the screen still frozen on Logan's face mid-smirk, "is who he really is." For the first time since the trial had begun, Logan's smirk faltered. The weight of the evidence was crashing down on him. His attorneys whispered furiously, but he merely clenched his jaw, his fingers tightening around the edge of the table. The prosecution continued presenting damning evidence: forged financial statements, fake investment portfolios, and testimony from former employees who had been too scared to speak out before. It was becoming impossible for even Logan's most ardent defenders to deny the truth. But even as the walls closed in, Logan Caldwell still believed he would walk away untouched. He had always found a way to escape consequences before. This time, though, the faces in the gallery, the relentless prosecution, and the unwavering judge told a different story. This time, justice had momentum. The trial continued, each day more damning than the last. Witness after witness took the stand, laying out in excruciating detail how Caldwell Capital had stolen their dreams and shattered their futures. Yet, Logan Caldwell sat in his chair as if he were an honored guest rather than a man facing the full weight of the law. He leaned back, casually adjusting the cuffs of his designer suit, his expression one of sheer boredom. Judge Eleanor Tate, a woman known for her sharp mind and unwavering dedication to justice, watched him carefully from the bench. She had seen all kinds of defendants over the years: hardened criminals, remorseful con men, and terrified individuals grasping at redemption. Logan Caldwell was none of these. He was something far worse. He was entitled. He truly believed the rules didn't apply to him. The moment that solidified this belief came midway through the proceedings. It was the third day of the trial, and the prosecution had just presented a series of damning emails. Each message outlined Logan's direct involvement in falsifying reports, manipulating numbers, and ensuring that investors were deceived. The evidence was irrefutable. Make the numbers look good. We need these suckers to sign on the dotted line. Logan's own words blared through the courtroom as a recording of a company meeting played on the large screen. Gasps filled the room. The families of victims clenched their fists, whispering furiously among themselves. Judge Tate narrowed her eyes. Even some members of the jury shifted in discomfort. But Logan? He smirked. That single expression sent a wave of disgust through the gallery. How could a man who had stolen millions from hardworking people, who had ruined lives without a second thought, smirk in the face of his own crimes? The arrogance was astounding. The lead prosecutor, David Reynolds, didn't miss a beat. He turned sharply toward the defense table, his voice laced with disbelief. Mr. Caldwell, do you recognize these emails? Logan's lawyer, Robert Sterling, a high-priced defense attorney known for defending the rich and infamous, immediately objected. Your Honor, this question has been asked and answered in pretrial hearings. Judge Tate, unfazed, lifted a hand. Overruled. The defendant will answer. Logan finally sat up, leaning into the microphone, his tone dripping with condescension. Yes, I recognize them, but let's not pretend they mean what you're implying. It's just business talk. You wouldn't understand. A stunned silence filled the courtroom. Margaret Ellis, the widow who had lost everything, gripped the edge of her seat. James Holloway, the retired firefighter, let out a slow breath, his jaw clenched. David Reynolds stepped forward, his face unreadable. Just business talk? You wouldn't understand? His voice was quiet, but the weight of his words hung in the air. Tell me, Mr. Caldwell, do you think the people sitting in this courtroom today, the ones who lost their homes, their savings, their ability to retire, do you think they wouldn't understand what it means to have their entire lives taken from them? Logan chuckled under his breath. I think people get emotional when they lose money. It's unfortunate, but it happens. More gasps. A woman in the back let out an angry scoff. Even Judge Tate's expression darkened. The prosecutor folded his arms. You stole from these people, Mr. Caldwell. That's not an unfortunate business decision. That's fraud. Logan waved a dismissive hand. I think the media has exaggerated all this. If people didn't want to take risks, they shouldn't have invested. It was the moment when even his most skeptical defenders had to accept the truth. Logan Caldwell wasn't just corrupt, he was unapologetic. Judge Tate's voice rang out, sharp as a blade. Mr. Caldwell, I strongly suggest you watch your tone. This is not your boardroom, and this court is not here to entertain your dismissiveness. Logan shrugged but said nothing further. The tension in the room was suffocating. For so long, people like Logan had found ways to avoid consequences, slipping through loopholes, using their wealth as a shield. But now, the smirk on his face no longer seemed so confident. As the trial pressed on, the weight of the prosecution's evidence was undeniable. But something even more powerful had been revealed in those moments. Logan Caldwell wasn't sorry. He never had been. And that made the outcome of this trial more important than ever. The prosecution had built a strong case against Logan Caldwell, but no amount of financial records or legal documents could compare to the raw, undeniable human suffering of his victims. That became painfully clear when Margaret Ellis took the stand. Margaret was a widowed mother of 3, a woman who had once believed in the promise of financial security. She had invested her late husband's life insurance payout with Caldwell Capital, trusting Logan's company to secure her children's future. Instead, she was left with nothing, forced to sell her home, move in with relatives, and watch her youngest daughter drop out of college because tuition was no longer an option. As Margaret settled into the witness chair, she unfolded a small, worn piece of paper with shaking hands. Her voice trembled at first but gained strength with each word. "I trusted Logan Caldwell," she said, her eyes locking onto his with quiet defiance. "I believed his promises, just like so many others in this room." Logan sat back in his chair, expression unwritable. Margaret inhaled deeply before continuing, her voice breaking. "The day I realized what had happened, my daughter had just come home from class. I had to tell her we couldn't afford another semester. I'll never forget the look on her face. She didn't cry, she just nodded, like she already knew what I was going to say." A heavy silence filled the courtroom. Even the jurors shifted uncomfortably, some exchanging quiet glances. The weight of Margaret's words pressed down on everyone except Logan Caldwell. The prosecutor, David Reynolds, let the moment hang before speaking. "Mrs. Ellis, did Mr. Caldwell ever personally inform you that your funds were gone?" Margaret shook her head, her grip tightening around the paper. "No, I tried calling. I sent emails. I even went to the Caldwell Capital office. The receptionist told me Mr. Caldwell was unavailable." She swallowed hard. "I sat in the lobby for hours, hoping he'd come out and explain. He never did." Logan remained eerily calm, his fingers tapping against the table as if counting the seconds until this testimony ended. Reynolds turned toward him, his voice sharp. "Mr. Caldwell, do you have anything to say to Mrs. Ellis?" For the first time, Logan leaned forward, clasping his hands together. "I regret that anyone experienced financial hardship," he said smoothly. "But investing always carries risks. I can't be responsible for the choices other people make." A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Margaret's eyes flashed with anger. "It wasn't just a risk," she snapped. "You lied. You manipulated us." Logan simply shrugged. Judge Tate's gavel struck, commanding order in the courtroom. But the damage was done. Logan Caldwell had just sealed his fate, not with evidence, but with his own heartless indifference. The tension in the courtroom reached a fever pitch as the trial of Logan Caldwell neared its conclusion. The final day of testimony had been a spectacle of legal strategy and raw human emotion. A vivid display of the contrasting worlds of Caldwell's high-flying lifestyle and the grounded, desperate struggles of the people he had deceived. As Judge Elise Tate prepared to deliver her sentence, the air was thick with anticipation, and the gallery was packed with reporters, victims, and a curious public eager for justice. Judge Tate, known for her meticulous nature and no-nonsense approach to the bench, cleared her throat and surveyed the courtroom with a stern gaze that demanded silence. She began by summarizing the case, her voice steady and authoritative, each word enunciating the gravity of Caldwell's crimes. "This court has been presented with overwhelming evidence that Mr. Logan Caldwell orchestrated one of the most egregious financial frauds in recent history," she declared. "His actions not only bankrupted hundreds of families but also shattered the trust that is essential to the functioning of our financial system." As she spoke, Judge Tate's eyes occasionally flicked to Caldwell, who sat rigidly, his earlier nonchalance replaced by a dawning realization of the severity of his situation. The judge detailed the cunning methods Caldwell used to lure investors into his scheme, highlighting the fabricated returns and the fake testimonials that painted his company as a beacon of success. She recounted the heart-wrenching testimonies of the victims, like Margaret Ellis, whose lives had been irrevocably altered by his greed. Then, turning to face Caldwell directly, Judge Tate's tone became even more cutting. "Mr. Caldwell, throughout this trial, you have displayed a disturbing lack of remorse for your actions. You have attempted to justify your deceit under the guise of business acumen and entrepreneurial spirit. However, what you see as business, the law recognizes as fraud." The courtroom was silent, save for the soft murmur of note-taking and the occasional shutter click of cameras. Judge Tate continued, "It is this court's duty to uphold the law and ensure that justice is served, not just to punish wrongdoing, but to deter such behavior in the future." She paused, letting her words sink in, then delivered the decisive blow. "Therefore, I am sentencing you to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Additionally, I am ordering the liquidation of your personal and corporate assets to create a restitution fund for the victims of your fraudulent activities." Gasps and murmurs filled the room as the reality of the sentence hit home. Caldwell's face, once flush with arrogance, now bore the pallor of shock. He looked around, perhaps for the first time truly seeing the faces of those he had wronged, their expressions a mix of relief and somber satisfaction. But Judge Tate was not finished. "Let this sentence serve as a stern reminder to anyone who thinks they can flout the laws of this country for personal gain," she added. "No one is above the law, and no amount of money or influence can shield you from the consequences of such actions." As Caldwell was led away in handcuffs, a ripple of applause broke out among the victims and their families in the courtroom. The sound was bittersweet, a cathartic release after months of anxiety and despair. It was a historic moment, a clear message that the justice system could indeed hold the powerful accountable. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy was immediate. Cameras flashed and reporters jostled for comments from the prosecution team, the defense, and anyone else involved in the trial. The story of Logan Caldwell, the once untouchable magnate who had risen to dizzying heights only to plummet into ignominy, was a stark tale of hubris and downfall. In the days that followed, the Caldwell case remained a hot topic of discussion. Editorials dissected every aspect of the trial and its outcome, praising Judge Tate's handling of the case and debating the implications for future prosecutions of white-collar crime. Social media buzzed with opinions and hot takes, each thread weaving a larger narrative about justice, accountability, and the resilience of those who had suffered at Caldwell's hands. For the victims, the sentence was more than just a legal resolution. It was a step toward healing. Forums and support groups saw messages of hope and solidarity as people shared their own stories of recovery and rebuilding. The restitution fund, while not able to fully restore what was lost, provided a financial lifeline to those most affected by the fraud. The trial of Logan Caldwell would go down in history, not just for its dramatic courtroom moments and the high-profile defendant, but for the light it shone on the strength and dignity of those who stand up against injustice. It underscored the enduring principle that in the eyes of the law, everyone, no matter how rich or powerful, must answer for their actions. The legacy of the case would be measured not in the financial calculations of stolen wealth, but in the reaffirmation of a simple, unyielding truth: justice prevails. The aftermath of Logan Caldwell's trial rippled through the community and beyond, sparking a nationwide conversation about the integrity of the financial industry and the crucial role of judicial oversight. In the weeks following the verdict, panels and public forums sprang up, attended by legal experts, ethicists, and those personally affected by financial crimes. These discussions often centered on the vulnerabilities of ordinary investors and the necessity for more stringent regulatory frameworks to prevent such fraudulent activities. The spotlight was not just on Caldwell's heinous actions, but on the systemic loopholes that had allowed him and others like him to exploit trust for so long. In these forums, tales of personal loss and recovery were shared, weaving a tapestry of resilience and communal support. The narrative shifted from individual failure to collective strength, underscoring the importance of community vigilance and an informed public. Advocacy groups intensified their efforts, lobbying for legislative changes that included stricter penalties for financial fraud and enhanced transparency in investment practices. These measures aimed to restore public confidence and ensure a fairer playing field for all market participants. Educational initiatives also took root, with nonprofits and financial advisory services offering workshops on financial literacy, aimed particularly at older adults and others who might be more vulnerable to investment scams. These sessions provided tools and knowledge to help individuals recognize potential risks and make more informed decisions about their investments. The story of Caldwell's downfall served as a powerful cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the need for vigilance in a system rife with complexities and challenges. The Caldwell case had indeed transformed from a legal battle into a societal rallying cry for reform and accountability in the financial sector. The outpouring of public support for the victims and the widespread demand for systemic change reflected a shift towards a more proactive stance against financial malfeasance. As the community and the nation watched, waited, and worked for these changes, the impact of Judge Tate's firm handling of the case resonated as a beacon of hope and a testament to the power of the judicial system to enact meaningful change. Through this collective endeavor, society at large began to reclaim trust in both the markets and in those appointed to protect them, aiming to prevent the next Caldwell before another dollar could be deceitfully taken. As Judge Tate's courtroom emptied after the conclusion of Logan Caldwell's trial, the atmosphere was charged with a sense of justice served, but also an acknowledgement of the work still ahead. Outside, the buzz of media and the community's discussions continued to echo the courtroom's sentiments. The reverberations of this trial extended far beyond the legal outcomes. It sparked a profound recognition of the need for systemic change. Judge Tate, having presided over this significant case with a stern yet fair hand, reminded everyone that the law holds sovereign power over personal status and wealth. Her final remarks resonated deeply with those gathered, emphasizing that no individual, irrespective of their financial stature or influence, is above the law. This case was a stark reminder of the fundamental principles that underpin justice and equality. It reinforced the belief that true justice not only addresses the wrongs but also upholds the values that bind society, ensuring that each individual, regardless of their background or standing, is treated with fairness and dignity under the law. The story of Logan Caldwell serves as a poignant reminder that true power lies not in wealth or status, but in integrity and accountability. It teaches us that justice, though sometimes slow, is relentless and blind to social standings. For our elderly audience, this narrative reinforces the value of steadfast principles and the importance of fighting for what is right, regardless of the personal costs. As we navigate through our later years, let this story inspire us to uphold our values, advocate for justice, and leave behind a legacy of honor and dignity that can guide future generations. Guide future generations. Guide future generations. Guide future generations.